Dylan Gabriel. He got there. His throw to the end zone. Incomplete. A generational win for Kansas. Finally toppling Oklahoma.
Every week of college football keeps getting more interesting and interesting the more that I look at it and the more we figure out about these teams with or without certain players, or how for real these top of the line teams really are. We're going to talk about that and a lot more in this video, but before we get into that, I'm going to show you guys my top 25 for week 9. Okay guys, so here it is. Now as you can see, the beginning of it, the top 5 relatively stays the same, but once we get out of that top 5, everything starts to look a little bit different. I'm going to explain all the movements and why I have the teams where they are, but first we're going to start off with the number 1 ranked team in the country to me, and that's the Michigan Wolverines. They were on a bye week this week and get to play Purdue this weekend, and I know there's a lot going on with Michigan right now according to the NCAA and the whole allegations going on right now of them recording sidelines and all that type of stuff. I'm going to touch on it for a bit, give you guys a little update. Apparently an insider in Michigan gave all this away, which is so hard to believe. It feels like the university itself, the AD as well, just wants Jim Harbaugh out of there. And we even learned today that they've retracted his contract offer. So Jim Harbaugh probably won't even be coaching at Michigan if any of these allegations are true going into next year. So Michigan's going to have a lot of lost players. They're going to lose a lot in the recruiting trail, and they're going to have to completely rebuild. I feel bad for them, but this is just what happens. You cannot cheat. It's unfair for the rest of the teams in college football, especially competing against them. And I just hope this all gets resolved soon, and we're not sitting here like a year or two in the future waiting for something to actually come out of all this. But moving on with all that, number 2, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes. They played at Wisconsin this weekend. They won that game 24-10. Kyle McCord, their quarterback, did not look good. I do not think he's worthy to being an Ohio State quarterback from my point of view. Looking at what they had in the past with CJ Stroud, Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields, he just does not belong in that type. He's more of like a game manager, and he's just scared, and his ball security just isn't there. He has fumbled the ball every time that a defender has basically gotten to him. More likely than not, he is fumbling in the pocket, and he just plays really scared. I feel bad for the kid. He's just not ready for this, and it shows. But even with that being said, Ohio State is 8-0 with one of the best defenses in the entire country, which is really weird from last year. Their defense was not great at all, and their offense was amazing. And it's the complete opposite this year, especially at the quarterback position. But running back TreVeyon Henderson, he had like 160 some yards. They're going to need that in the future. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., having those two guys with Kyle McCord, they just elevate him, and that's going to be their only way of success in the future. Then moving on to number 3, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. They played Florida and they beat them down. This game was 43-20. It did not look like that. It was like 26-7 when I stopped watching, and Florida they couldn't get out of their own way. Billy Napier does not know what he's doing. He's not making good calls, especially if they want to beat like the number 1 team in the country. You do have to be aggressive, but you have to have the right play calls, and he is just letting that team down over and over again. Graham Mertz was running the entire time I was watching. The offensive line is horrible, and Georgia showed even without Brock Bowers, they are still a really good team, and they're probably going to win the SEC. Then after Georgia, we have the Florida State Seminoles sitting at the 4th spot still. They beat Wake Forest 41-16. Jordan Travis put up amazing numbers in this game, but the thing I want to talk about is the rest of their schedule and even the ACC championship game, with Clemson looking as bad as they are, North Carolina losing, Duke losing. This conference is really just Florida State and maybe Louisville. Louisville is the only other team that I think is going to make the championship game, and that's going to be who Florida State plays in. I don't think Louisville is really that good unless they're playing at home, and we all know in the championship game it's not going to be a home game. So Florida State, they have a really easy path to making the playoff for the first time since 2014. And then rounding out the top 5, we have Washington. They survived a scare against Stanford. They won that game 42-33. It was 35-33 when Stanford, they were threatening. They were probably going to score on 4th down. A receiver dropped the ball on 4th down when he was wide open, and it's just inexcusable. The past 2 weeks, Washington got bailed out of losses, and it's unacceptable. Stanford is one of the worst teams in the Pac-12, along with Arizona State, and Washington practically lost to both of them. Now, I know they did win, but they won because the other teams made mistakes. They didn't win because they have that championship like pedigree. It was all based on the other teams. They could very easily be 6-2 right now. So that's why they're at number 5, rounding out my top 5. Now moving on to number 6 is a team that I think think is better than Washington and is going to beat Washington in the Pac-12 championship game, the Oregon Ducks. Now, Oregon and Washington already played. Washington did win that game at home, but the reason I think they won that game was because they were at home. I do think Oregon is the better team, but with the head-to-head loss, I have to put Oregon behind them, at least until Washington loses or they play that Pac-12 championship game and Oregon wins that. Oregon absolutely beat up Utah at home, which no one's been able to do for a few years now. Utah had like a 27-game win streak or more. I forgot the exact number. I think that's it. You guys can let me know if I'm wrong or not. And they won 35-6. They blew them out. Even though Utah has a backup quarterback, that's no excuse to be losing by 29 points. It's inexcusable. Oregon absolutely dominated them from start to finish in this game. They were in control. Utah did not score a point in the second half. And it just looks really impressive on the Ducks. And then moving on at the 7th spot, I have the Texas Longhorns. They beat an overrated BYU team 35-6. Same score as Oregon and Utah. It's absolutely crazy. They won this game with the backup quarterback Malik Murphy. He took over for the injured Quinn Ewers, and he's going to have to play Kansas State this weekend, which Kansas State, they just shut out Houston 41-0. The same team that Texas practically lost to last week. So this is going to be a really tough game for Texas coming up, especially with a backup quarterback. I might have Kansas State actually winning that game, but if Texas was healthy with Quinn Ewers, I would probably take them. It just sucks to see one of the best players in college football go down. And then right after Texas, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. They were on a bye week this week. They get to play LSU this weekend for a rematch of last year when LSU won at the last second. So we'll see if Alabama could get that revenge. Then up next at number 9, I have the Penn State Nittany Lions. They sleepwalked into a game with Indiana, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. They won that game 33-24. I feel like Ohio State kind of broke this team because they did not show that they were a top 10 team at all. Indiana has a terrible offense, and they were able to pass the ball all over Penn State's defense, and they even scored more on Penn State than Ohio State did. I don't know if the Michigan game is looming in the back of their minds after they lost to Ohio State, but Penn State really needs to wake up because they have to start putting things together if they're going to beat that Wolverine team. And finally, rounding out my top 10 is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They beat Pittsburgh 58-7, absolutely destroyed them. Now, Pittsburgh had a lot of like turnovers, mistakes, and stuff, turnover on downs. And Sam Hartman even threw a couple interceptions and no touchdowns. But they did what they do best. They force turnovers, they play amazing defense, and they wait for you to make the mistakes, then they capitalize on them. And that's why they took advantage of an inferior Pittsburgh team that doesn't know their full identity yet. And with a head coach that put them under the bus. Then at the 11th spot, we have the overrated Ole Miss Rebels. Now, if you guys been watching me every single week when I make these videos, I am constantly talking about Ole Miss because of just how they let down every single year because of Lane Kiffin. They did win this week 33-7 over Vanderbilt, but it wasn't even pretty. They did play decent defense, which Ole Miss, when they play a better team, they normally don't play good defense at all, and Vanderbilt is just terrible. Everyone knows this. Ole Miss is just overrated. Everyone's trying to put them in the top 10. But to be honest, they're not a top 10 team. They're going to lose to Georgia and probably drop another game. And I'll bet anybody in the country on it. I really do. They will finish this year 8-4 or 9-3 like they always do. Stop overrating Ole Miss. And after Ole Miss, I have Oklahoma, another team that I kind of think is overrated. They barely beat a bad UCF team last week, and they walked into this game and everyone thought that they were going to bounce back. That was a letdown game. Did not happen. They ended up losing to Kansas, a team that also doesn't have a defensive pulse. This has been a great year for the Sooners and their head coach, Brent Venables, but I don't think they've turned that corner completely yet. I think in the next year or two is when Oklahoma will be primed, especially on defense, and I think they'll really shore up their offense and be a top contender. And after Oklahoma at the 13th spot, I have LSU. They're on a bye week. Like I said, they're playing Alabama this weekend, and I think LSU has a good shot. They have a really good quarterback, Jalen Daniels, and that offense itself is just potent. I'm just worried about their defense and allowing the big plays that Jalen Miller of Alabama can make. And then moving on from LSU, at 14 we have Air Force. They won their game against Colorado State, their in-state rival, 30-13, even though Colorado State outgained them from 339 yards to 293. Now, Air Force is an all-running team. They ran for 261 yards in this game, 32 passing yards. But the thing with Colorado State is they're not a rushing team, they're a passing team, and they threw for 300 yards on this Air Force defense. We haven't seen that all year. Air Force has been playing really good defensive football, but Colorado State made it look easy passing on them up and down the field, but they could not finish drives, and that's the reason that they lost this game. And after them, rounding out my top 15, we have Missouri. Missouri had a bye week this week. They'll be heading on the road to face Georgia next week in a good game. I think it's going to be a good game personally, but I don't think Missouri is ready to take the next step and beat a team like Georgia, especially in Athens. It's going to be really hard on them. And moving on, we have Louisville at the 16th spot. They beat Duke 23-0 at home. Louisville can only beat these good teams at home. They seem to just wake up and have more energy and just play better when they're at home. And then when they play away, they just play like the type of team they kind of are. They're an average ACC team. But nonetheless, when they're at home, they play some of the best defense like I have seen. They shut out an okay Duke team with Riley Leonard, not their backup. And this is a team that I personally think is going to be playing Florida State in the championship game. We'll see what they could do then. Up next at the 17th spot, we have James Madison, and they survived a game against Old Dominion, won that game 30-27. And I'm going to tell you guys, the only reason they won this game is Jordan McLeod, their quarterback, and Reggie Brown, their receiver. Hooked up 9 times in this game for 3 touchdowns. Jordan McLeod, he threw 2 interceptions, but again, he had 340 yards passing. Old Dominion is an inferior team. I think James Madison can win out. They might even represent the group of 5 over Air Force if they trip up, but we'll have to see what happens. And then moving on from them, I put Oregon State at the 18th spot. They actually lost to Arizona. I predicted that in my last video. They lost to a good Arizona team, 27-24. I really wanted to rank Arizona, but I think if they win next week, I think they play UCLA. If they win that game, I might have to put them in the 23-25 spot because they'll have really good wins and they'll be 6-3. This team has looked really good. They should have beaten USC and have played other really good teams close and beaten a couple good ones. This team is really underrated and just watch out for them. Then next at the 19th spot, we have Tulane. They survived a game against Rice, 30-28. I don't know what's gotten into Tulane. They have not looked good the past few weeks. I feel like they're going to lose a game or two just based on the way they're playing. I mean, Michael Pratt, their quarterback, went 22 for 30. He almost had 300 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. They played really good on offense, but they couldn't finish drives. And again, mistakes. I still think very highly of this Tulane team. I just don't believe in them to finish out with, especially how they're playing right now. And then rounding out the top 20, we have the Utah Utes. We talked about this. They lost to Oregon. Embarrassing fashion at home, 35-6. They're going to have a chance to bounce back. If they win the rest of their games, who knows? Something can happen. Crazier things have happened in the college football world. We're just going to have to wait and see. And at the 21st spot, we have the Tennessee Volunteers, who survived a game in Lexington. They won 33-27 over Kentucky. Now, we all thought, me included, that Kentucky was going to run all over Tennessee with their standout running back, Ray Davis, but that was not the case at all. Honestly, Kentucky didn't even have 100 yards rushing. They had 372 yards passing from Devin Leary, a quarterback that has underperformed this year. He's one of the worst quarterbacks in the SEC, and he put up 372 yards on this Tennessee defense with 2 touchdowns. And moving forward, that is a red flag for this Tennessee team, especially when they get to play Georgia. I think they're going to get absolutely destroyed. The way the Volunteers talk and even their fan base does not measure up to how this Vols team is this year. They're not that good on offense, and they really aren't that good on defense, especially in the secondary, like they aren't every other year. But speaking of their offense, Joe Milton, he was 18 for 21. He had 228 yards and 1 touchdown. That's pretty good for his standards, and they were able to run the ball with Jalen Wright. He had 120 yards. So it was a very balanced game. I just don't think they're going to be able to perform down the road. Next, I have USC. USC, another team that survived on the road at California. They won this game 50-49. California scored a late touchdown, and they elected to go for 2 and the win. They didn't convert, and they lost the game to the Trojans. I just cannot believe how bad this USC team is, especially on defense. They would have lost a 3rd game in a row if California could just hold on to the ball and not make mistakes. They fumbled the ball 3 times, lost it, threw an interception, That's 4 turnovers to 1 for USC, and they lost by 1 point. They would have won the game. They had the lead, lost the lead, and then had to come from behind and ended up going for the win. Just happened to be the wrong choice at that time by the head coach. One final thing I want to say about USC: good luck Caleb Williams in the NFL, because the rest of this team ain't going anywhere. And next, right after them, we have UCLA. They beat Colorado 28-16 in a pretty defensive game. I'm not gonna lie. Colorado kind of held their own in this game. 28 points given up isn't that bad, but UCLA really doesn't have the best offense. And Colorado, again, 25 rushing yards is just not going to get it done. Their defense isn't good enough, or their run game, to be like a legitimate threat. Even passing about 217 yards, it's okay, but it's not enough to beat these really good teams like UCLA, Utah, Oregon, and Washington. And even with all that put together, UCLA threw 2 interceptions and had 2 fumbles. Colorado won the turnover game by 4 and still lost by double digits. This team is not ready, but I have optimism in the future. Maybe in the next couple of years, I think Colorado can be a really good team. And then moving on, at the 24th spot, I put Kansas at that spot. They're 6-2. They beat Oklahoma 38-33 at home. That's the first time they've beaten Oklahoma in forever, if not all time. I'm really excited for this Kansas team, especially when their starting quarterback Jalen Daniels comes back. They could be kind of scary down the line in the Big 12. Then rounding out my top 25, I have Kansas State. Again, we talked about it earlier. They beat Houston 41-0. Will Howard, 164 yards in this game, 2 touchdowns. He only had 2 completions the entire game. And to shut down a decent Houston team, especially on offense, it's just really good. They had 208 yards total, but again, they could not finish drives. Kansas State shut them down when they tried to get into the end zone and just forced them into uncomfortable situations and scenarios. And if they're able to do this against Texas, I believe that they'll win that game. Then there's a couple teams on the outside I want to give a shout out to. I want to give a shout out to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's been playing really good recently. They actually beat this Kansas State team, but the difference between them is Oklahoma State has a loss to Iowa State and South Alabama. They lost to South Alabama 33-7. So just looking at that alone is why they're not in the top 25 right now. They did beat Cincinnati 45-13, and if they beat Oklahoma next week, you will see a major rise in Oklahoma State. And another team I want to give a shout out to is Fresno State. Fresno State's been playing good football as well. They're 7-1. They beat UNLV, a good UNLV team this year, 31-24. If they win the next couple games, you guys can expect them being in the top 25 as well. And the last team I'm going to give a shout out to is the Liberty Flames. They're 8-0. They actually played on Tuesday, won that game 42-29. Austin Reed put up 365 yards passing, 4 touchdowns with 30 completions, and they still lost this game. Almost 500 yards of offense on both sides. It was a really crazy game for a Tuesday. But that's going to wrap up the video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Let me know who you guys think #1 team in the country is and who else deserves to be on this list that wasn't featured in it today. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.